I'm Isabella Green, 32 years old, Director of Communications at a luxury fashion corporation in New York. Some mornings I wake up in my breezy 40-story apartment, sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, and wonder, how did I grow up in a family where love was handed out like ration coupons, and my share was always shorted? I grew up in Westfield, New Jersey, where every lawn was trimmed as precisely as my mother's patience, and neighbors still addressed each other by name plus their kids' academic records. My father, Samuel Green, was a seasoned tax attorney famous for his chilly demeanor and his favorite saying, "Success has no feelings." My mother, Patricia, used to be a fashion editor, someone who could spot a wrinkle in a dress from 10 feet away. But if anyone in our home was treated like royalty, it was Alexa, my younger sister, the girl who walked into a room like the spotlight had been waiting for her. Even as a child, Alexa was the kind of kid you just had to love. She had bouncy blonde curls, Colorado sky blue eyes, and a melodic voice soft enough to make anyone's defenses fall. While I took piano lessons, Alexa danced ballet. I won a state-level math competition? My mother nodded and said, "Good. But you really should fix your hair." Alexa got picked to be the Christmas angel in a church pageant? My mother teared up. "Dad?" He straightened his tie and said, "Alexa truly has leadership aura." I made straight A's, followed every rule, never caused trouble. Maybe that's exactly why I became invisible. I still remember the day I got my NYU acceptance letter for communications, the school I'd sacrificed countless nights to get into. I brought the letter to the dinner table, heart pounding. But before I could say anything, Alexa squealed. I got chosen to be the face of Aunt Marlene's spring campaign. They're putting my photo up all over the mall. My parents burst into applause. Me. I folded the letter and slipped it into my jeans pocket. I graduated with honors. Landed a job at one of the most creative firms in New York. Bought my own apartment, without a single dime from my parents. But none of that seemed to weigh as much as Alexa getting a small feature in a local fashion magazine. Little Alexa has always had a special sparkle, my mom would say, even now when she's 28. Isabella's smart, but Alexa makes people fall in love at first sight. I once overheard her say that to our neighbor during afternoon tea, thinking I was upstairs. I stood behind the door, heart freezing. Last year, I was promoted to communications director after a global campaign I led brought in over $200 million in revenue. I called home hoping for some genuine praise. My mother's response? "Oh, Alexa just got invited to MC the mayor's daughter's wedding. First time hosting, but they said she was a natural." That's when it finally sank in. Nothing I did would ever be shiny enough. Because the spotlight in our house had long since chosen its subject. I got used to Dad's polite nods and dinners where every conversation revolved around Alexa's travel plans, her new boyfriend, or her exhausting life, even though she never held a full-time job for more than 6 months. I don't blame her. Alexa simply lived the role they handed her from day one. Me. I became the independent sister, the one everyone assumed would be fine no matter what. But here's something they don't realize. No one can survive forever on fine. At some point, when enough invisible bruises pile up, they rupture in ways no one expects. Mine did the night I walked into my cousin's wedding, alone, no plus one, and the whole family turned toward me like I was a B-list contestant who just got eliminated from a reality show. "You came by yourself?" my mom asked, her tone airy but laced with disappointment in every syllable. I smiled like I always did. "I'm still me, Mom. Not half of someone else." That's when everything started to shift. I wasn't planning to bring up his name again. But some memories, no matter how deep you bury them, rise like a rusted needle in still water, sharp enough to sting. Ethan Crawford, the man I once thought I'd buy a home with, raise dogs, throw Christmas parties next to a towering fir tree. We met 3 years ago at a communications seminar. Ethan worked at a tech firm in Brooklyn with warm brown eyes and a smile that made you let your guard down. We spent 32 months together. I still have the photo of him sitting in my kitchen on a crisp October morning, wearing a gray sweater, peeling apples to make pie using my mom's recipe. Back then I thought I'd found the one. Until the night I opened his laptop on a Monday, not to snoop, just to send over a pitch draft he'd asked me to help with. His email was still open. Subject line, "Wish we could have spent last night together again." From Marissa, his content lead. Some moments don't need confession. Don't need explanation. The screen's cold blue light said everything. I didn't cry. Just asked one question. How long? He paused for 5 seconds, longer than it takes to pull a trigger. 6 months. But I wasn't planning to. I closed the laptop gently like folding an old page. Got up, grabbed my coat and walked out of my own apartment, where ironically he'd lived rent-free nearly the entire time. After that, I refused to let anyone see me break. I worked so much that coworkers started leaving post-its reminding me to eat. Deleted dating apps. Said no to every setup. Wrapped myself in deadlines like armor. My family knew none of this. Not out of shame, but because I knew they wouldn't really ask. You're tough, my mom once said when I had emergency surgery for appendicitis, right before mentioning that Alexa had just been chosen as the face of a local perfume line. Then the wedding invite from Olivia, my aunt's daughter, arrived. A fancy ivory envelope with embossed gold letters. You are invited with a guest. I stared at that thing for 10 minutes, jaw clenched so tight my molars ached. Not because I had no one to bring, but because no matter who I brought, they'd still see me as trying too hard. I even thought about hiring someone to play a boyfriend. My friend Tasha sent me a link to a professional escort service with the note. Just find a guy who looks decent and knows when to hold your hand. That's it. I laughed and shook my head. Pretending won't change anything. Why fake it to prove I'm worth something? On the wedding day, I drove myself to the Astoria Hotel downtown. The plum-colored dress I chose wasn't flashy, but it said loud and clear, I don't need a +1 to walk into this room. I stepped through the lobby under soft chatter and clinking glasses. My mother's eyes flickered when she realized I'd come alone. Alexa, in a creamy dress sweet as Tier 2 wedding cake, tilted her head and whispered with a smirk. Told you, Isabella never brings anyone to these things. My dad stood near the dessert table holding a glass of white wine, nodding at me with a slight frown instead of a greeting. My cousins, people I hadn't seen in 2 years, whispered something just loud enough for me to catch the words, still single. No one asked how I was doing. No one mentioned the new campaign I had just launched with a French fashion brand that got a feature in Vogue. But a distant relative did ask. Isabella, I heard your sister's opening her own photo studio? Impressive. She's always had an artistic mind. I smiled politely. Inside I felt hollow. I picked a seat next to a large potted plant in the corner of the reception hall, the least noticeable spot. Not to hide, but to observe, like an outsider accidentally invited to a party that was never meant for her. Just then, a hotel staff member approached with a tray of champagne. I took a glass and turned toward the stage where Olivia stood next to her fiancé, radiant and glowing with joy. A voice spoke close to my ear, soft as air but sharp enough to make me turn. Did you pick this spot because no one would bother you, or because it's the best place to study everyone's hypocrisy? I froze. The man, tall in a pale gray suit, ash-gray eyes, looked nothing like anyone in my extended family. He stood there, half smiling, his gaze free of pity. I didn't answer right away. But my heart, quiet for so long, skipped a beat. Not because he was handsome, but because, in that fleeting moment, I felt something I hadn't believed in for a while. Someone actually saw me. Before I could respond, a shrill voice sliced through the moment like a dull blade on glass. My sweet niece, cousin of the bride. You finally showed up. Aunt Gwen, my mom's younger sister, appeared in a lilac dress, clutching her third glass of champagne. She leaned in closer than necessary, her lipstick smeared. No date? Not even a temporary boyfriend. I smirked. Hard to find someone willing to attend a wedding without asking why I'm still single at 32. Aha, she cackled, patting my chest twice. Then table 18 is perfect. Got you a seat next to Aunt Ruth. She just finalized divorce number 3, so she'll understand. A server arrived holding a seating chart. She nodded. Isabella Green? Please follow me. The plum dress I once thought elegant now felt painfully out of place among the sea of pastels and glittering sequins. I walked behind the server, keeping my posture steady, even under the sharp gazes of Alexa and her high school clique. Table 18 was tucked near the window, close to the restrooms. A small card on the table read, Special Guests. I sat beside Aunt Ruth, recently divorced, bright red nails, and the imprint of an old ring still visible on her finger. Who are you? She asked, skipping formalities. Isabella. Bride's cousin. Oh, she nodded. So you're one of the forgotten ones too? Before I could reply, Emma, my uncle's 16-year-old daughter, glued to her phone, piped up. You came alone? Mom guessed that right. I picked up the water glass and took a slow sip, hoping it would dissolve the lump lodged in my throat. From the main hall, the music shifted to a soft symphony. The wedding had begun. Olivia and the groom entered like stars in a romantic autumn film. Cheers, clapping, laughter echoed. And I sat in a corner where no one remembered my name. My mom appeared when the appetizers were served, scanning the room like she'd spotted a dress code violation. Why are you sitting here? She asked, her voice just above a whisper. This is where they put people without a +1. There's no shame in that, she tilted her head, adding quickly, as long as you're still trying. I gave a dry chuckle. What's your definition of trying? Hiring a stand-in date for Instagram photos like Alexa. She squinted but said nothing. Instead, she turned, pulled out her phone, and snapped a shot of the mushroom soup, posting it with a caption like, "Perfect appetizers with my beloved family." I wanted to walk out. Leave the table, the whispers, the needle-pointed judgments behind. But I knew what they'd say if I did. Just another reason to claim I was too sensitive. Single and easily offended. The young server forced a polite smile as she placed the main course in front of me, roast chicken with truffle sauce. I took a bite, chewing slowly. I tasted nothing but the bitterness building in my chest. Clinking glasses. Laughter. Heels tapping across wood floors. It all sounded like noise from a world I didn't belong to. When the MC began announcing fun games for all the single ladies, I considered slipping off to the restroom. Too late. Aunt Gwen and 3 other women grabbed me, each taking an arm. Come on, Isabella, this part is your favorite. Maybe tonight's your lucky night. Remember Jessica caught the bouquet and got married in 3 months. They dragged me onto the dance floor like a defendant being led to trial. I stood among women of all ages, most younger, giggling, posing for cameras. I felt like an outdated prop on a shiny new stage. The spotlight glinted off my dress. At that moment, Olivia turned, bouquet in hand, eyes bright. I squinted against the lights. Then, I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, I saw him again. Near the bar. White shirt. Hands in pockets. Eyes fixed on me. My heart thumped once. Before I could move, Olivia threw the bouquet. A collective scream followed. Something hit my shoulder and fell. I didn't pick it up. But someone else did. He walked over, gently placing the bouquet in my hands. Looks like this belongs to you, he said, eyes steady. I thought of a witty response or a polite refusal. Instead, I stood still, bouquet in hand, our eyes locked. No music. No laughter. Just quiet amid the chaos. And there, in the noise of a celebration not meant for me, one thought rang clear. Maybe I'm not ready for love, but I'm tired of pretending I don't need anyone at all. The bouquet was still in my hands when the piano music suddenly halted mid-note. The main doors swung open with a loud click. No one spoke, but the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The man stood in the brightly lit doorway, his white dress shirt from earlier now replaced with a perfectly tailored black suit, a gray silk tie, and hair combed back neatly as if he'd just stepped out of a high-stakes meeting just to be here. The steel watch on his left wrist caught the chandelier light above. He scanned the room like someone surveying a familiar stage. His eyes stopped the moment they met mine. I froze, the bouquet in my hands suddenly heavy like a piece of evidence. A nearby server whispered, voice trembling, "Is that Mason Caldwell? The CEO of Orion Dynamics?" His name rippled through the room like a spark catching dry tinder. The air shifted instantly. Conversations halted, the clink of spoons against glasses went silent. A few distant relatives straightened in their seats and reached for their phones, but none dared take a photo. Mason walked straight toward me, his steps steady, never breaking focus. I didn't even have time to react before he stood in front of me, his warm cologne brushing past, familiar though we had clearly never met. "You got here before me?" he said loud enough for those nearby to hear. Traffic was brutal. I opened my mouth but no words came out. My eyes scanned the room, my mother's wide-eyed stare, Aunt Gwen's frown, Alexa's frozen face. Mason gently took the bouquet from my hands and set it on the nearest table. Then he turned back to me, his hand resting lightly on my back, right between my spine and shoulder blade, as if the gesture had been practiced 100 times before. "I'm sorry for being late, Isabella," he said, this time in a voice meant only for me. "If you don't mind playing along, I'll explain later." I looked deep into his eyes. No hesitation, no hidden meaning, just an eerie calm. Like he had rehearsed this scene and I was his reluctant co-star. I took a breath. "You really are late." He smiled, winked like it was an inside joke. Before I could gather another thought, my mom appeared. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and caution. "And you are?" Mason extended a hand. "I'm Mason Caldwell. It's a pleasure to meet you. Isabella's told me so much about your family." My mother didn't hide her confusion. "Oh, really? She's never mentioned you. We've kept things private," I cut in, surprised at the steadiness in my voice. "Because we've both been judged too many times by the wrong relationships." Alexa stepped forward, her lips curling into a polished smile. "Hi, Mason. I'm Isabella's sister." "Nice to meet you," Mason said, shaking her hand. "I've heard about your talent for event planning. Isabella said you always make things shine." Alexa froze, lips tightening. And just like that, my mom beamed like Mason had fallen straight from heaven. "I think you should sit with the family," she said quickly. "We can't have our future son-in-law at the wrong table." I cleared my throat. "Mom." "Well, not officially yet," she backtracked. "But it's so nice to see you, finally with someone." Mason gently held my hand. "Actually, I think I'm the lucky one." My mom practically lit up. Even my dad, who hadn't looked up from his phone in half an hour, raised his eyes, studying Mason with an expression that finally resembled actual interest. They moved me to the head table right near the bride and groom. Mason's hand stayed at my elbow, firm, warm, respectful. The flood of questions, congratulations, and curious glances came instantly. I smiled, nodded, stayed in character. Mason didn't miss a beat. He talked about a fictional business trip to Sweden, where we had randomly run into each other, followed by a 3-hour coffee neither of us wanted to end. I threw in a few details, glancing toward him like we were perfectly in sync. It was terrifying how smooth it all was. My mom leaned closer, voice lowered. "Are you sure? You shouldn't try to really keep this one?" I leaned back, exhaled quietly. Mason tilted his head toward me, whispered, "I think we just won an Oscar." I laughed. Came out sharp, sudden, and oddly freeing. But also confusing. Beneath this performance, something real had started to stir. A question slipped through the cracks of the persona I just built. Who was this man really? And why had he chosen to rescue me, a complete stranger, from my own family's judgment? I glanced at him, but Mason was already smiling at Aunt Gwen like nothing unusual had happened. Still, my instincts buzzed. Something deeper was at play. He poured me a bit of Pinot Noir, his hand swirling the glass with the ease of someone who'd sat through hundreds of formal dinners but never truly belonged at any of them. Dinner had moved on to the main course, but I barely touched my plate. His eyes glanced at me now and then like he wanted to say something, but not in front of others. When the MC announced the opening dance for couples, Mason leaned in. "Want to get out for a bit? You look like you're starting to suffocate." I gave a tight smile and nodded. He led me out before my mom could suggest a photo. We slipped through a side hallway, out onto a veranda covered in golden wisteria lights. The cool air helped me breathe again. I leaned against the stone railing, eyes on the dew-wet lawn. "We're putting on quite the production," I said. Mason stood beside me, not too close, not too far. "There's no better script than truth, delivered at the right time." I turned slightly toward him. "You still haven't answered the most important question. Why help me?" "Because I saw you drowning in the eyes of people who should have loved you most," he said, his voice lower now. "And I know that feeling too well." I said nothing. Not because I didn't believe him, but because something in him had shifted. Something quiet but impossible to ignore. "My family's in Portland," Mason began, eyes lowered to his hands now loosely folded. "My dad passed from a stroke when I was 12. My mom decided success was the only armor I'd ever need." I tilted my wine glass gently. "So you became a CO before turning 30? He nodded. "In exchange for sleepless years, endless comparisons to other people's sons, And the constant feeling that no matter how many zeros you add, it's never enough. I exhaled. Sounds familiar. Because you were also forced to fit into someone else's mold? Since elementary school, I nodded. My sister, Alexa, was always the center of attention. Me. I was just background. Mason turned to me, eyes steady. And yet you're still standing. You still walked into that room tonight as your whole self. Wholeness is a label I had to give myself. Because if I let them define it, I'd just be the smart one nobody ever marries. He smiled softly, no trace of pity. You may not remember, but we've met before. I turned to him, surprised. Where? New York. Strategic Marketing Conference at the Grand Summit Center. 8 months ago. I furrowed my brow, trying to recall, but Mason continued. You gave a presentation on emotional engagement in cybersecurity software campaigns. You wore a moss green silk blouse. Your voice didn't even shake when a guy from Phoenix Systems grilled you for 5 straight minutes. Memory clicked. You were in the 3rd row. Black band on your left wrist. When I made my final rebuttal, you nodded. You remember? Not many people nodded at me in that room. So anyone who did made an impression. He chuckled, then his tone shifted. Then you disappeared. Skipped the post-conference reception. Had to get home to take care of a sick dog. I shrugged. Not exactly glamorous. I looked for you at the check-in desk. Gave up. Why didn't you say something that day? Didn't have a reason. But tonight, seeing you there, surrounded by people looking at you like you were the last empty chair at the table, I knew if I didn't step up, there might never be another chance. I turned away, trying to hide the smile pulling at my lips. This all started with a lie. But it could end with something real. You sure about that? I asked, voice lower. Because pretending is easy. But real. Real is dangerous, he finished. But worth it. Later, when we returned to the banquet hall, the way people looked at me had changed. No more pity. No more smirks. My mom introduced me as our eldest, currently seeing someone really interesting. I squeezed Mason's hand lightly. He leaned down and whispered, what starts as a role sometimes turns out to be the perfect first scene. I didn't answer. But something inside me shifted. Not because Mason was a CEO. Not because he stopped the judgment of an entire room. But because he saw the parts one hid and didn't look away. Mason had stepped out to take a call, and I returned to my seat with a glass of wine in hand. Across the hall, Alexa was talking to 2 of our father's relatives. I was about to look away when she walked straight toward me, her stilettos clicking coldly across the tile. Can we talk in private? She asked lightly, but her eyes weren't subtle. I stood up instinctively. She led me toward the hallway near the side banquet room, where the lights were softer, out of earshot from the photo-snapping guests. I asked the hotel staff, Alexa began, cutting to the chase. He was escorted down from the 28th floor, not with you. I froze. The vein in my neck twitched. You know what's on the 28th floor? She went on. Executive boardrooms. Someone like Mason Caldwell doesn't show up late to a wedding if he's really your boyfriend. My fingers tightened around my clutch as I kept my face neutral. What's your point? My point is you're not actually dating him. I looked him up on LinkedIn. You 2 don't follow each other. No posts, no pictures, no tagged vacations. Nothing. I turned away. So what is it, Isabella? Did you hire a fake boyfriend? Or did someone feel bad enough to pretend just so you wouldn't be pitted tonight? She laughed. No need to fake it, Isabella. But you're clearly desperate. A man like that doesn't just appear on cue and look at you like a Hallmark movie, unless he's acting. I didn't respond. No more reason to lie. She tilted her head, lips tight with satisfaction. I won't tell Mom. But don't think this little charade will stay hidden for long. We returned to the main hall just as Mason did. He was already seated, calm on the surface, but something tightened at his jawline. As I sat down, my mom leaned over and whispered, "What did Alexa say?" She looked a little intense. Before I could reply, the mic squealed to life. The MC invited loved ones to give congratulatory speeches. The spotlight moved. 1 second later, all eyes were on me. "Your turn, beautiful cousin," someone called. "We're waiting for that storybook romance." I wanted to decline, but the pressure in that room, hopeful and skeptical alike, pushed me up. Mason's hand touched the small of my back. If you don't want to, I'll take your place. I took a breath, walked to the mic amid polite applause. I'm really happy for Olivia and Ryan today, I began, my voice a bit shaky. True love is rare. It's not something you build just to convince others it exists. There was a murmur below. Alexa stood, arms crossed, like she was watching a play unfold. I came here alone, I continued. Mason and I met tonight. He just wanted to help me avoid humiliation in front of a family that measures everything by appearances. Silence fell over the room. Heavy. Long. My mom's mouth parted. My dad furrowed his brow. Alexa leaned back, eyes gleaming like she'd just won a game where she held all the white pieces. But the surprising thing is, I glanced at Mason. Every scripted touch, every rehearsed word somehow made me feel something real. Something kind. Something I've spent a lifetime hoping to get from my own blood. I left the mic quietly and returned to the table, chin held high. Mason had already stood to greet me, eyes unwavering. I'm sorry, I whispered. No need, he replied. That was worth being real. Just then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and sighed. Emergency with the team in Singapore. The contract might fall through. I nodded. You should go. Just know, tonight wasn't about pity. I didn't answer. He looked at me for a few more seconds, then walked out. His footsteps echoed, then disappeared behind the closing glass doors. Inside, my mom had already turned to Alexa, disappointment spilling across her face. I returned to the table, sat down beside my empty wine glass and the hollow feeling in my chest. No more compliments. No more envious stares. Just quiet questions echoing in my head. If everything that happened was real, what had I just ruined? And if it was fake, why did my heart feel this heavy? The next afternoon, I sent Alexa a brief message. Cornerstone Cafe. 3:00. If you've got time. No question mark. No explanation. I wasn't sure she'd show up. But 2 hours later, Alexa walked into the cafe in a beige trench coat and oversized sunglasses, her eyes scanning the room like she was afraid someone might be recording the moment a confidence icon showed up, unsure of herself. I had chosen the table in the corner, right by the window. My coffee was already halfway cold. She sat down, pulled off her sunglasses, and stared at me for a long moment without saying a word. Her face wasn't layered in makeup like usual, and faint circles under her eyes made her look more real than I'd ever seen her. Figured you wouldn't bother texting me, she said, pressing on the word bother, like a dig at a familiar arrogance. Figured you wouldn't come, I replied flatly, my tone even. She smiled, but not like she'd won anything. Because I feel guilty. I stared at the small coffee stains spreading on the edge of the saucer. What happened yesterday? Yeah, it blew up. But honestly, I'm not mad at you for exposing the truth. You weren't wrong. The issue was how you did it, like you had the right to rip the curtain down because you could. You always act like you're better than me, Alexa snapped back. Like me being loved more is somehow my fault. I looked up. I'm not jealous you're more loved. I just felt invisible, because no one even cared enough to ask if I was okay. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. The grinder at the coffee bar filled the space with a strange rhythm. Alexa laid both hands on the table, fingers intertwined. Bradley cheated on me. I didn't react right away. She continued, I found out 6 months ago. It was with his assistant. 10 years younger. Fresh out of college. I nodded gently. Alexa. Don't pity me, she cut in quickly. I'm only telling you because I'm tired. Tired of performing so people will believe I have it all together. I didn't feel pity. I just saw someone who'd finally kicked off her heels after standing too long. No more perfect posture. Just a woman relearning how to breathe. I always thought you were the strong one, Alexa said, but it felt like you were constantly trying to prove you deserved every scrap of praise, while quietly resenting those who were loved more easily. I lowered my head. Maybe I did. Unintentionally. But I never knew what you had to carry. I always assumed everything was laid out for you. No, she exhaled, eyes fixed on her hands. I was just taught to make it look that way. We sat in silence for a long while. I ordered 2 new lattes. There was no more language of winners and losers. Just something quietly being unnotted from a dark corner of a relationship that had always followed a script someone else had written. On the way home, I took a detour to the old house on Maple Drive. where Mom used to read finance magazines in the kitchen and Dad listened to the radio out on the porch. I rang the bell. Dad opened the door, eyes full of surprise. Not because I showed up, but because I didn't call first. We sat at the dining table. Mom brewed chamomile tea, asking in a soft but guarded voice, "Isabella, is something wrong?" I set down my teacup. "I need you both to understand this. I'm not here to fulfill your unachieved dreams, Mom, or to be the counterweight to Alexa." Dad rested his elbows on the table, thoughtful. Mom pressed her lips together. I continued. "When I chose marketing over law school, you were disappointed. When I stayed single, you worried. But I've never needed you to bail me out of bankruptcy, a divorce, or a scandal. Why has that never been enough to make you proud?" Mom glanced at Dad like she was hoping for backup. He finally spoke. "We never meant to hurt you, Isabella. We just don't understand what you want. Then don't pretend to understand. Or accept that I'll live in a way that makes me happy, even if it doesn't please everyone else." Mom tightened her grip on her teacup. After a pause, she sighed, her voice slower. "Sometimes I wish you showed your feelings more so I'd know how to care for you. Is that because you only know how to care when there are signs of failure?" Dad interjected, "Both of you are strong women. But this family's never been good at recognizing strength the right way." I didn't want the conversation to turn into a list of grievances. I just needed them to listen. This time they did. No interruptions. I left at dusk. A soft breeze rustled the maple trees at the gate. 3 days after that talk, I returned to my apartment in Soho under a misty drizzle that felt more like fog than rain. The place was quiet, the amber kitchen light softening the air. I was about to brew a mug of mint tea when the doorbell rang. I peeked through the lens. Mason. Holding a black umbrella, hair slightly damp, eyes hesitant. I opened the door without thinking. "You didn't call first." "I figured if I called you'd say no." I stepped aside. He walked in, set the umbrella down, took off his coat and held out a small paper bag. "Almond croissants from that cafe you like. Olivia mentioned it once." I took it. "Is that the only reason you're here?" "No. I owe you an apology, and I have a serious proposal to make." I sat on the kitchen stool. He leaned lightly against the counter. No tension, but his eyes had never looked more serious. "Isabella, I didn't go to that wedding to save a stranger. I went because I missed you. Ever since that October conference, ever since your presentation left the whole room in silence." I stayed quiet. I was surprised you nodded at me. But I remembered the way you fired back when challenged. The way you gave depth to something so dry. I set the pastry box down and leaned my elbows on the table. "Why didn't you come straight up and introduce yourself that day?" "Because I didn't want to be just another man in the crowd." Mason paused. "I figured if we ever met again I'd do it differently. But when I saw your family turn on you, I realized I'd waited too long." I swallowed hard. "We staged a scene. But scenes don't last. That's why I'm here," he said, stepping closer. "No more acting. One dinner. No roles. No scripted lines. Will you?" I nodded. "No conditions needed." 3 weeks later, we met at a small Italian restaurant tucked down an alley in Tribeca. No tuxedos, no violin music. Just red wine, hand-rolled pasta, and 2 people meeting exactly where they were meant to. Mason told me about his company, Orion Dynamics, and how he once turned down a $600 million deal because he didn't want to lose control over the brand's philosophy. I told him about the new campaign I was leading for an eco-conscious cosmetics line, where I insisted on keeping an older model in the ads despite internal pushback. "I'm not surprised," Mason said when I told him about the finance team's objections. "You've never been someone who folds to the crowd." We didn't mention the wedding. We didn't need to. 2 months later, Mason invited me to Orion's headquarters to help brainstorm ideas for the company's new brand identity. I wasn't part of the core design team, but he wanted my perspective, not as a girlfriend but as a professional. "You don't need someone to stand beside you for show," I said, stepping into a conference room filled with 5 other creative directors. "You need someone who actually works. And you never fake anything," he smiled, unfazed in front of his team. In June, my family hosted a birthday celebration for my dad's 60th at a lakeside restaurant in Greenwood. I received a printed invitation that clearly read, "Honored guest, Isabella Green guest." We arrived just as the room was filling up. My mom gently touched my arm as I stepped into the foyer. No judgment. No measuring eyes. Just, you look radiant. Alexa arrived late but not out of habit. She had just completed her final presentation for her interior design course at NYSID. Her eyes sparkled, not from lighting but from something real. I didn't think you'd actually go back to school, I said, half in awe, half in admiration. I got tired of living someone else's life, she replied. Thought I'd try living mine. Mason chatted with my dad about security tech, then turned to discuss lavender plants with my mom. No performance. No need to impress. He did one thing right, he listened. At the end of the night, my dad placed his hand on my shoulder, his gaze softer than I'd ever seen it. I'm proud of you. Not because you have a boyfriend, but because you never let yourself become someone else's copy. I gently squeezed Mason's hand under the table. He squeezed back. No words necessary. In October, we launched a collaboration campaign between Orion and the cosmetics brand I worked with. The new product line, built on simplicity, safety, and honesty, tripled its projected revenue in the first quarter. I was no longer introduced as Alexa's sister. I no longer walked into family gatherings with a defensive smile. I walked in with the man who had once stepped toward me in a room full of pitying eyes, not to save me but to see me exactly as I was. Mason didn't complete me. He made me stop shrinking. Me. I learned to step into the light without waiting for permission. Not because I needed validation but because I stopped doubting my worth. Isabella's story is proof that sometimes, what we need isn't approval from others, but the courage to recognize our own worth. Once seen as the overlooked daughter, she rebuilt her life on her own terms. Love didn't come through pretending, it arrived when she stopped running from herself. Now Isabella no longer lives to please, she lives with honesty, and that's the truest kind of freedom. What do you think about Isabella's journey? Is strength or kindness the real key to change? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories ahead.